Have you ever had that experience where you are just so angry at your partner or just so upset with them that you can't think clearly and your words just don't come out right? You sort of fumble over them and you fudge them up. Everything comes out wrong and you just end up even more frustrated. Well, we all have a rhythm and a pattern in our speech that might vary somewhat when we're upset that we call speech fluency. Speech disfluency is the opposite of speech fluency. That rhythm and that pattern of speech gets totally disrupted in some people. It's just what happens when the feelings part of your brain hijacks the logical part of your brain. And this can sound like hesitations, repetitions, prolongations, interjections, or filler words. And if you don't know what is going on with yourself or with your partner, and you don't call a timeout when this happens, that conflict is going to get so much worse. Now, while speech disfluency might be an outcome of being mad at your partner, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Because in this video, I'm going to delve into 5 reasons why couples get mad at each other. More importantly, I'll share what you need to do to work through that anger. To help me explain this to you, I'm enlisting some help from Sarah and James. And they're a couple that I see in my private practice. They were coming to see me because they were experiencing more arguments. And these arguments were getting so heated that they were wondering if they should even be together anymore. Here's my confession. They're a fictitious couple. I can't and don't talk about my real clients, but Sarah and James represent many of the clients that I see in my private practice, and the issues and situations are very real, so it's more of a composite client. There's no details of my real clients here. Sarah and James have been married for about 7 years, and recently their relationship has been riddled with arguments and tension and more escalated conflict, and they decided to come to me as a marriage and family therapist for some help. So a little bit of background. James is an avid golfer. He's been spending more time on the green. And Sarah, on the other hand, is grappling with this very demanding job and a new boss and feeling like she's juggling too many balls at once. To make matters worse, she feels ignored and dismissed by James. Their once peaceful home now is filled with raised voices slamming doors. And James feels that Sarah's just on him all the time about golf, about work, about everything. As a therapist, I'm interested in helping couples with their emotional and relationship issues, but I can't overlook potential biological factors that could be influencing their behaviors and their emotions. So I sat down with Sarah and James and we went through a checklist that I believe everyone should be considering when addressing anger or conflict in a relationship. And that's because I just want to rule out that there's nothing biological going on. And I know it's really boring of me to bring this up, but it is a legitimate responsibility. So the questions are sleep. Are you getting enough rest? More importantly, is it a quality of sleep that is actually restful? Nutrition. Are you eating? Remember the acronym HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired? It's all about crankiness. Could there be any drugs or medications that are influencing your mood? And sudden onset, if this is a sudden onset, if these feelings of anger or the conflict has appeared suddenly and you're noticing a really dramatic change in your partner, it might be time for a medical checkup, even if it's just to rule something out. In one of our initial sessions, Sarah and James recounted an incident from the previous week. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah was feeling the distance between her and James and really missing him, and invited him to join her for a yoga class when he got back from the golf course. She was hoping that it would be a bonding experience, a chance for them to reconnect, to hang out. But to her surprise, James reacted with irritation, snapping at her for even daring to suggest it. This took her off guard and the atmosphere quickly soured and it escalated into this big blow up. As a therapist, I often want to focus on the root of the conflict rather than the back and forth that went on. So in my mind, I'm thinking, what is the trigger? Why did James react so strongly to a simple invitation to a yoga class? With a little bit of digging, it became evident that James had somehow taken offense to being asked to go to a yoga class. I had to explore that with him. And I came to see that James had some pretty big shoulds. And shoulds cause conflict in any relationship. So if you've ever spent time with a 4 or 5-year-old or younger, you'll know that they can be the center of the universe, their own universe. They believe that they should be allowed all of the toys in the toy store and have a meltdown when they get a no. They believe that they should be able to eat all of the candy all at once and sulk when you say no. Now, technically, this is an age-appropriate form of narcissism, but we give them a pass because they're kids, and hopefully we're going to teach them to share and give them boundaries and gently guide them to be more understanding of other people and the fact that the universe does not revolve around them. Here's the problem. That little egomaniac never really goes away, and it lives on inside of us. And occasionally, it rears its head, demanding that the world should be exactly as they want it to be. So here's a side note. I planned to record this video in my office, but when I arrived, there was this cacophony of noise going on outside my office because they were doing the tree trimming. My inner 5-year-old had a meltdown. They should know that doing this outside an office is disrespectful. They should know that I was going to record something. This is totally unacceptable. I've got to do something. How dare they? Now, in relationships, our 5-year-old omnipotent selves might have similar meltdowns, but they might be a bit more subtle. So in relationships, they think that our partner should just know what we are thinking or should just know what we want or what we need. And with some effort, I was able to help James acknowledge that his inner kid was really thinking that Sarah should just be able to know his mind and read the fact that he wasn't in the mood for yoga. And he could see in our therapy session that this was totally irrational. It was his little kid acting out, and it was impulsive and really sort of egocentric. The antidote to shoulds is acceptance. And that is how I quickly got over my irrational anger at the tree trimming situation. So first of all, let me describe what not living in acceptance is. It would be demanding that they stop, or yelling at them, or calling the city to complain and writing a very strong worded letter to the mayor. None of which would have done anything other than make me more frustrated because I would be fighting against reality. I would be trying to change the world around me. All of those things were out of my control, and trying to change things outside of my zone of control never really works. Living in acceptance sounds like, oh, that's a bummer. I feel disappointed and annoyed, and I guess they have to trim the trees one day a year, so I guess I'll have to go somewhere else. Similarly, James had to accept that Sarah really can't read his mind, and if he wants her to understand that he's tired after golf, he has to communicate that. He can't get frustrated at her for not being able to know his every thought. That's as futile as me as demanding that the city stop trimming trees. Acceptance often comes with the feeling of disappointment, which is a really uncomfortable feeling that we always want to avoid. But disappointment is just the feeling that you get when you don't get what you want. Nobody I know has always got what they want. Sometimes our little 5-year-old kid is really disappointed that our partners can't read our minds the way that our caregivers did. Because our experience as 5-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, whatever, was that mom seemed to know what was going on with us. Mom seemed to know when we were hungry. Mom seemed to know when we were tired and needed a nap. And our little 5-year-olds that live on in us really want the same from our partners. And we have to be the grown-ups and tell them that that's not possible. If you're still with me and watching this and are kind of digging the way that I teach, do me a favor and hit subscribe. And if you are interested in learning more ways to deal with conflict, check out the Conflict Compass. It's a course I wrote on relationship conflict. I'll put the link below. It's a family systems oriented course, so it's quite unique, I think. And my top tip here is if you take the conflict style quiz, you get 50% off. Another argument between Sarah and James that comes to mind is also fairly typical of the couples that I work with, and I call it the expectations explosions. So one of the homeworks I set for James and Sarah was for James to take Sarah on a date to try and get some romance back. And he had to plan it, and he wasn't allowed to tell her anything about it, and she wasn't allowed to get involved. But when they saw me the next week, I found out that my homework assignment had been a complete disaster. So picture this, Sarah dressed up in a lovely evening dress, eyes sparkling with some new fancy makeup and a bit of anticipation in her eyes for a romantic night out. She's been looking forward to this day, imagining a fancy restaurant with soft lighting and beautiful white tablecloths. But when James walks through the door, he's holding pizza. Now, don't get me wrong, he's made an effort. There are actually candles and flowers, and his intentions seem quite sweet. But the reality is that it is miles away from Sarah's expectations. That's what I call the expectation explosion. It's a common scenario because Sarah had this fixed idea of what she wanted and expected the date to be like. And obviously, when James walked in with the pizza box or takeout box, she was disappointed. And as much as she tried to pretend to be okay with things, the atmosphere was just thick with tension. And James obviously picked up on this and became a bit defensive, and the bickering started, and it just got worse. Expectations in a relationship can be a disaster unless they are communicated. So the antidote to expectations explosions is to communicate, not detonate. Or just pay attention to the story and the fantasy that you're building up. Because again, unless you communicate it, your partner won't know, and it's a setup for you to be disappointed and cranky. The takeaway romantic date disaster was a good opportunity for me to remind Sarah and James of something we all know, and that is that anger is just the tip of the iceberg. We use the iceberg as a metaphor because anger is the feeling we have first. It's above the surface. And for that reason, some people call it a primary emotion. Others call it a secondary emotion. Don't quite know which is right. But beneath the surface of the water, hidden from view, is a vast expanse of other emotions. Fear, hurt, sadness, shame. It's often said that anger is the bodyguard of fear too. So the next time anger bubbles up, it is worth diving in a little deeper and asking yourself, what is going on underneath my anger? In that session, I helped Sarah realize that her anger was masking deeper feelings of disappointment and hurt. So what I tried to help them both understand is that if Sarah had approached James with those feelings rather than anger, things might have gone very differently. If she had said something like, "This is lovely, James, but I can't help feeling a little disappointed. I'd built up a fantasy of a fancy restaurant in my mind, and I know it's not your fault, and I didn't tell you that, but I just wanted to share my feelings with you so you know what's going on with me." If she'd have said that, James might have not felt so defensive, and there might not have been a blow-up. Instead, James might have got to share his experience of the situation, which we actually got to in the session, and it sounded something like this. "I hear that you're disappointed because you wanted me to take you to a restaurant, and I did think of that, but I got you takeout from the place we used to get food from when we were first dating, because I wanted to remind you of all the fun we had, and I thought I would light these candles and put those rose petals that you love all over the table, and it would be really romantic for us." So the lesson here, anger is often just the starting point, right? By acknowledging and communicating emotions beneath the surface, we can actually foster deeper connections with each other. The way that James delivered that response was a total game changer, and it led to this lovely moment of them connecting and hugging, and there were Kleenex and tears everywhere. Sarah realized that James had actually put thought into their date, and his intentions were genuinely quite sweet. So with their defenses lowered, this realization helped Sarah open up about her week, and she shed some light on why she might have been irritable even before James got home. She talked about her job, and her boss had just handed her a project to complete over the weekend. Sarah's got some people-pleasing tendencies and took it on without a second thought. But here's the thing. All feelings, including anger, are sources of information. Anger is sometimes an indication that a boundary has been crossed. Sometimes we cross our own boundaries, letting ourselves down and feel angry. Other times, someone else oversteps our boundaries, intruding into our zones of no-go. And Sarah saying yes to her boss was her crossing her own boundary. But also her boss asking her to work unpaid over the weekend felt to me like he was crossing a boundary. What do you think about that? Leave me a comment below if you think he stepped over the line. The work we did in that session was to help her get clear on what her boundaries were, because if you don't know them, you can't see them, and both you and other people will walk right over them, and you'll end up cranky and angry. So the cure to this form of anger is to remember that boundaries are a blessing. They are a fence that you put up around yourself to protect your emotional world and to empower you to make choices that honor your well-being. I try and remember, fence up your feelings. You have to know where your boundaries are. You have to be able to see them. Otherwise, you'll cross them and other people will too. So let's take a look at this journey that Sarah and James, and hopefully you and I, have been on together. Because what I really hope you'll see is that being mad at your partner is a key. And it can be used to open up the information we need to understand about ourselves. It could be a key to tell you that you're imposing shoulds on your partner. Or it could be a key to understanding you have uncommunicated expectations. It could be a sign that a boundary has been crossed, and it's usually always a sign that there are other feelings underneath the surface that might be helpful for you to communicate to your partner using an I statement. There's another video on that you should check out. So being angry with your partner is normal. What you do with that anger, though, makes and breaks a relationship. And if you want to know more about relationships and conflict, please hit subscribe. I've got a lot more to say about it.